Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
All right, and today we're going to talk about how to create a just and fair world, or we trash the place. Now, Jarod, it's up to you to fix it. So Jarod, you're going to have to fix the place, and we're joined by Jarod Mendoza. And Jarod is a sustainably unemployed graduate from
My parents will love to hear that.
I know, from the University of Dayton, another ringing endorsement for a liberal arts education.
Mm-hmm.
And you got your degree in human rights and sustainability with a minor in Chinese studies.
Minor in sustainability and then concentration in
Chinese.
It's that a millennial thing where you have to list all your credentials.
Oh, okay. So, and how on earth are you not fully employed with that kind of background? You know?
I'm taking a pause.
If you had studied how to destroy the environment, you would be so rich right now. So
trust me, my dad tells me all the time.
No. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your background, why you went into this, and what that's going to mean to the future of the world.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, thanks for having me. So, as you mentioned, graduated from University of Dayton and grew up on the west side of Cincinnati. For our listeners here, the west side is a suburb of Cincinnati, but operates very much as a small town, a place where you could give my mom anyone's name and she could probably tell you where they grew up, who their parents are, maybe what their phone number is. So it's a very small, conservative, Catholic, Christian town. So had that upbringing, had great parents, wonderful siblings, and went to Dayton and chose mechanical engineering actually to start my studies because I was good at math and science. And my dad said, there's gonna be a lot of jobs in engineering. So, it's probably a pretty good field to go into. So I thought, okay, sounds good to me. I'm 18 years old. What do I know? So I signed up for it but got into my, studies, and through many different experiences, realized that engineering was not the path I wanted to choose for myself. And I think that was an important distinction I made at that age too, this is my path that I can make that choice. So I had spent a few months in India working with rural communities around how the climate crisis is impacting their livelihoods, and realized that there are enough smart people working on the technology and the science of how we're adapting, and not enough people who are understanding that technology, that language, and then communicating that to policy and to communities, and making sure we also have, a bend towards equity and justice in there. So came back and decided to change majors. Had many conversations with my parents about that. My mom still asks me today, do you ever think you're going to go back to engineering? And I said, if I haven't gone back now, I probably won't. They're always worried about, money, or, my dad asked, are you okay with being poor for the rest of your life when I changed majors? And I said, as long as I'm, able to make enough to support myself and dedicate myself to work that I enjoy, then I'll be happy.
Well, so, as it should be. Well, so, all that said, it strikes me that there's an awful lot of people that are thinking and feeling a lot of the same thoughts and feelings, your generation in particular. So, but I was wondering, it doesn't seem that common that people that start out in engineering would become interested in human rights. Yes, sustainability, but human rights. So what intrigues you about those two topics, and how do they relate to each other?
Yeah, so as an engineer, when I was at Dayton, I always joke my first love I felt like was sustainability, because I was exposed to it through a living, learning community I was in, and ended up working at one of the institutes there called the Hanley Sustainability Institute. And it was those programs that, maybe I didn't deserve it at the time, and probably didn't as an 18-year-old, really entrusted me with a lot of leadership responsibility to go and say that this is a field that is starting to really blossom, especially in the university sector. And so I was able to work on projects and see a different pathway for myself. Many times, traditional engineering looks like you go and work for, and which I had done, GE Aviation, other, big engineering firms, consulting. And that was the only pathway that, I was really aware of at the time. And so it was being able to, maybe pause. It was being shown a different pathway that I was able to connect, that I can use this technical background for something that I felt was more worthwhile and that was good. So was able to realize that, using engineering for sustainability, but I connected it with the social justice and human rights. And when I made that change in major, it really felt like, kind of coming home, and was so excited to go to classes, and like homework didn't even feel like homework because it was what I'd been waiting for. And I felt like there was a disconnect in the sustainability, language and social justice and human rights, and there was the equity component missing. And so, and especially so in engineering as well. And so I felt like that was a missing piece in how we're talking about designing the future to be more sustainable. We need also to think about where justice and equity falls into that.
So what do you mean about equity component?
So when I'm talking about equity, and it is ironic here. I mean, for our listeners who aren't able to see us, as a white male talking about equity, is I'll often refer, to the people who are, in the field, in the industry, industry, quote unquote, leading these conversations. So I will talk about it in terms of, I always try and make space for other voices, and making sure that, we're not, just as a white male, the only people in on the conversation who are, talking about what the future can look like. So there's, many different components of it. You can talk about diversity. Of course, there's equity. Inclusion is often the, DAI. Accessibility is often talked about. But
What's DAI?
so diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion is right now the buzzword that people are talking about, is thinking about, as we're, redesigning systems, these different components and how we can fit those in there. And I'm not an expert on, any of those by any means, so that's why I'll refer people to go do research on what exactly we are talking about.
We're redesigning systems. What does that mean? Because I don't see it.
Mm.
I'm sorry. I just think, man, we're just doing so much of the same old stuff and expecting a different result.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And I mean, one thing that, when it was probably sophomore, junior year, and I felt the same way, and I really challenged myself to, I kind of embarked on what ended up being a little over a year of just intentional listening. So I was not seeing the kind of change that I felt was necessary. I call it also, young person frustration,
Mm.
where, there's an author who says, is it's sad to look at, the way these systems operate, because, they just don't have to be this way. We can create something
Yeah.
better, but we
Yeah.
are so entrenched in this current system. So I, went on intentional listening, and really just, whenever I wanted to speak up, would, practice, biting my tongue and allowing room for other voices. And that meant asking a lot of questions. So really unpacking and trying to understand why we are in the situation we're in. And so that led to a lot of different discoveries. And a part of that intentional listening was asking professors about, okay, if we're talking about critical race theory, if we're talking about critical queer theory, or, critical gender theory, what is the alternative? What does that look like? How can we create a better world? And a couple of professors we would talk about really didn't have, response to that, because we're so used to critiquing the current system, because we're fighting for survival in many senses, that we aren't allowing ourselves the time or capacity to dream about what is a better world.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree, and I find it really frustrating that the people who are supposed to be um, encouraging people to think, that are in those positions, are not thinking themselves. Is one of the things that I always say about world peace, when people say, "Let's let's hope, or let's pray for world peace," and then if I say, "Well, what does that look like?" They don't know.
mhm,
They don't know.
mhm,
It's about having enough to eat and
yeah,
enough to a safe place to be and all that, and it's just so frustrating, because it feels like it's a template that ought to be laid over
mhm,
everything we decide to do. The
mhm,
same as with sustainability. I don't see sustainability as a class or a degree. I see it as a template
mhm.
that has to be built into all processes if we're going to still be in earth.
Mhm. Yeah, and I definitely recognize too, I mean, the privilege in being able to, I mean, especially now, as, Jay joked, as I'm sustainably unemployed, but being able to step back and think think intentionally about what it is I want to do. So I'm not faulting anyone for again acting on survival instincts when your back is up against the wall, when so many people are oppressed or being oppressed actively. So I do recognize the privilege in that.
Yeah, well, and that's the challenge, but I also think you used the word allowed, like I was doing intentional listening and I allowed other voices. And I think it's really powerful when white men, particularly who tend to be the people who make the rules and also be the active shooters in all the deaths we see from guns, um, are actively saying to themselves and maybe even out loud, I need to listen. And then I need to speak up and say to the guy next to me, don't talk like that anymore or don't do that anymore.
Hmm.
And I think we need to be doing a whole lot more of that.
Hmm. Yeah, and we were talking, earlier about the power of, seeing someone, someone you are able to recognize, in a mirror. So if I were talking to another, white dude and they're saying something inappropriate, they might be more receptive to me saying, hey, that's not okay. And so I completely agree that we do need more people, especially more white men, to step up into this space and call out, injustice and call out when we're seeing or hearing something that isn't right. And I recognize that, it's not comfortable.
Right.
It often is very uncomfortable, but if we want to create a better world, for ourselves, our children, and everyone else, then that's the work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, it's uncomfortable for everybody if they're trying to do the right thing. Um, so give us a couple of examples of a combination of social justice and human rights, and maybe something you've done personally um, in your life around
Mhm,
those
mhm.
issues.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate and really fortunate to have many opportunities to be involved in this work, both as volunteer capacities and also in paid, jobs, internships. One example, though, that I think, as I was, we were talking earlier, I never claimed to speak for, a generation or for a specific group of people. If I'm talking, it's based on, reflecting things that I've heard. But one thing I often hear from young people like myself who are talking is either not having the confidence or not knowing how to step into this space. And so one of the examples of, the social justice or sustainability work that I was able to be a part of, and it's always, being a part of a group. It's never, oh, I'm doing this as Jarod, is it was 2019 and it was, junior year at this University of Dayton. And this is right before Greta Thunberg was going to talk at the UN, March for Our Lives, or I'm sorry, March for the Future, Friday Future. And it was, there were many marches planned throughout the world on on this Friday in August, I believe. And someone came to us a week before that date and said, "Hey, is Dayton doing anything? Is the University of Dayton doing anything?" And me and a couple of friends who were all worked together looked at each other and said, "No, we aren't, but we should be doing something." And so it was really, someone asked that question. That was our marching orders. So we recognized, this is something that's happening that we need to be a part of, that we need to call attention to get others involved as well. So within four nights, we, pulled together this climate strike on University of Dayton's campus, where we had voter registration booths, we had education tables, because giving people resources on how to commit and do this kind of work. We had a plethora of speakers from all different experiences, and then usual sign making and chanting. So it was a really great opportunity for people to get involved and help bring others into the room, because oftentimes some of these groups and some of this work can feel exclusive to others who aren't involved in it.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump in here and let everybody know that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, reminding you it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God.
Thank God. So today we're joined by Jarod Mendoza, who is talking to us here about some of the things he learned in gaining his education to be gainfully unemployed in social justice. And I think that kind of brings us to the point where not rewarding professions and people who are seeking to treat everybody in a in a just way.
Mm-hmm.
We seem our culture, we can pay lip service to it, but the money, put your money where your mouth is. I mean, we're not actually encouraging that economically.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think people can, find work that is paid to do this, because we're talking about transition that, many businesses are looking to is
Okay.
how do we adapt and change because of, changing customer preferences. So,
All right. Well, I want to interrupt here because a note was just passed to me, and I'm going to totally blame Annie on this, that I changed Jarod's last name from Marsh to Mendoza. So you are now included in an entire culture.
yes,
You
yeah.
have culturally appropriated the entire
Yes,
Latin
yeah,
American
yeah.
mindset here.
How's it
So
Yeah, I was thinking to myself that I was like, if I say anything, controversial, then maybe it won't be associated with me because they won't have the right last
too
name.
late. Okay, so Jarod Marsh
Thank you.
is unemployed.
Yeah.
Yes, Mendoza's working like crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
So, so what was the outcome then in terms of, so you did all these things, voter registrations, chanting, all the cool stuff. And then what happened?
Yeah. So, I think those are often the buzzwords or, the cool and exciting things that people talk about in terms of registration, chanting, sign making. The one thing that I particularly wanted to see as a part of that was a pledge station, again, coupled with a resource station, is we wanted to see change come from that. There's often times where you go to marches or any kind of, activism, and which is, helpful in its own right, but you're involved for the day and then you leave and you go about your life. So we wanted people to walk away with that, with a sense of empowerment, and to enable them to go and make change within their own lives. Because another thing we often hear, I often hear, in myself and amongst other young people, is a feeling of despair of things are so bad right now. The crisis is so bad. The house is on fire. What can I do? As an individual, what can I reasonably do to affect change? And so, we challenge people to take the resources we provided them and say, these are a number of things you can do in your own life to affect change. Make a pledge to implement one in your life every day, every week, for whatever the frequency is. And so we had a lot of people walking away, saying that, I have now learned, steps and steps I can take to go and, make a change in my own life that will, on a grander scale, impact things.
Uh-huh. So you like to talk about ownership. So do you see this as a sort of a first step in kind of owning your own life?
Yes, definitely. Ownership is another buzzword that's being thrown around a lot. Is owning your own life and recognizing that, if we are to change things, we need to recognize how we as individuals fit within those systems and how we can affect the change from the system. So that means, recognizing your own ownership. In that, we always say every dollar you spend is a vote towards something. So what are you voting for? So
Yeah.
we are not passive players in this. And that, leads me to my, next thought is really we need to start getting up and get moving, especially as young people, and taking the power that we do have and using that to see whatever change we do want to see in the world. So that,
Particularly economics. You're a big voting block when it comes to the dollar
yeah,
and how you spend it.
yeah, so it means doing your research. I mean, we don't have enough time here to cover all the different ways people can make change, but where you spend your money is definitely one. Who you're voting for, what kind of organizations you're supporting, whether through donations, and so making sure you're doing the work, doing the research. Another thing that I think is really important for young people that I've encountered is especially myself, I often lack the confidence in saying, I'm just a young person. What can I really do? Especially when there might be resistance from older generations or others to allow room for this kind of change, allow space for that. The one example I can think of, just in my own life and away from sustainability and social justice was I really enjoy cooking. And so when I started cooking, I would make traditional meals that we would eat as a family every Sunday for family dinner, and my grandma or grandpa or anyone in the family would be a little bit resistance to, oh well, we've done this for generations, this is tradition, this is how we make something, and I said that's okay, and I appreciate the way it's been done in the past, but I want to do this for myself, to try something different. And so it shows up one Sunday or every other Sunday, and then all of a sudden people start trying this new dish that I'm making, and they say, "Oh, this is good. This is interesting. What else is there?" And so, and it's all vegetarian for myself. So opening up the possibility and the avenue for new change, and eventually you'll pique people's interest, and then it turns into, oh well, why didn't you tell me that this amazing dish, we were making grape leaves at the time, why didn't you tell me this tasted so good? And so we're able to bring people into that conversation that way, and it requires, though, for myself, young people, the courage and confidence to say we don't always have the roadmap for how to do this kind of work. There are many resources and people we can turn to, but if oftentimes maybe we have to make it ourselves. And so it requires a lot of confidence to go and say, I'm going to just experiment, go on a limb of faith here and see what can happen.
Well, marketing. So, that's the thing, isn't it? Marketing. It's all in the marketing. What's your next point? What people can do?
Well, and I think I'll turn this back to you, Annie. One thing that, especially right now, I've felt particularly challenged with is, I feel like, I know where I can look to do, quote unquote, this work, how to start making change. The one part I'm struggling with is how to find my own voice within this work, and I can work with others on this in many different capacities, but how do I, as an individual, find my own voice?
Okay. Well, I think one way you find your own voice is by focusing on what you're passionate about, and then finding some older people, old farts as I call us, uh, who are interested in the same work
Mm,
and ask to be mentored, because they have contacts, they have experience, they have stories, and in those stories are strategies that can help you develop your leadership, develop your confidence, and they will believe in you because they're investing. And I think I would encourage anybody who's older to find somebody young in their life and do exactly that. I don't care if it's through because they have religion, or like myself as an activist, but I think we owe it to the next generation to create those opportunities. I also think volunteering at different groups that may share your passion or need leadership skills, because as you demonstrated, you have a natural leadership ability where you see something and you say, all right, what can we do about it? That's really what a leader does. So I think there are a lot of solutions, but I think it all starts with that beginning sort of volunteering. Many women learn this, they raised their kids and then they didn't have a real job in life. I mean, a paying job. They had a real job, but and they volunteer somewhere, and then they gain some confidence, and the next thing you know, they're the manager of the place, or they're the person teaching how to train volunteers or whatever, because those leadership skills were already there. You can't run a house if you don't know how to be a leader.
mhm.
So I think that's a big piece.
And I think then to your question earlier of, what's the next thing for young people, and I think the marching order is ask for help. That's something that, especially as, a man, that sometimes you can be challenging, is saying, I don't know what the answer is, so I need help. And I was talking earlier, about the roadmap is, maybe there is no clear cut path, but we do need resources. We need others. We need older generations to give us an idea, to help guide us. So, the challenge is asking for help and raising your hand and saying,
Mhm.
I don't know, but I'm willing to find out.
Right, and even though it's not your responsibility, it might be in asking for that help, you're redirecting some of the old people in their resources to redirect. So many people are saying, "I'm lonesome," or whatever, and this could be an answer to some of that frustration. But anyway, so I personally believe that we need many ages in our life.
Mm,
And I
mhm.
remember when we first started doing internship program, um, the interns would say, we want to be friends after we leave here. And I would ask the question, can old people be friends with really young people? And they thought that was hysterically funny because yes, of course they can. And they've proven that. So well done you for all that you're trying to do. And I don't want to lose the time because I know you had something you wanted to read at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, so I always like to end with a poem because it makes me feel sophisticated and creative.
Go for it. Yeah.
No, but these are my own poems, so I'm not that sophisticated, really.
Okay.
This is one by Nikki Giovanni, who actually has ties to Cincinnati, so shout out. This is called A Journey by Nikki Giovanni. It's a journey that I propose. I am not the guide nor technical assistant. I will be your fellow passenger. Though the rail has been ridden, winter clouds cover, autumn's exuberant quilt, we must provide our own guidepost. I have heard from previous visitors the road washes out sometimes, and passengers are compelled to continue groping or turn back. I am not afraid. I am not afraid of rough spots or lonely times. I don't fear the success of this endeavor. I am raw, in a space not to be discovered but invented. I promise you nothing. I accept your promise. Of the same, we are simply riding a wave that may carry or crash. It's a journey, and I want to go.
That's great. So we're winding up here, but I just want to ask you, what do you think is the best advice that you've been given so far in this journey?
The best advice I don't think there's one particular advice that I've given. I mean, it's always just a plethora of advice that I use to, kind of guide myself. I think the one thing though recently that, I learned that kind of is helping guide me right now is listening to yourself to figure out where you fit into this puzzle. I was listening to this author talk about how, the kind of different levers of change and understanding those levers to figure out where you as an individual can fit into. So again, that means doing work to discover and learn about yourself, learn about what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and figuring out then how you can apply those to a system of change. Like for me, even as a young person, I can do social media, but it's not something I'm particularly drawn to. And I realized, and I always felt like that was, a major weakness that was going to be, a huge, a crutch later in life, because we're seeing so much, change through social media. We saw, start of Arab Springs, to Black Lives Matter and so forth. But the one thing I recently learned by, through this advice was a lot of these movements, the spark may be started by social media, but it's really the human relationship, the human connection that is providing the foundation, the building blocks and tools to sustain the change. So the advice is learning and understanding where you fit into the change.
Okay, well, speaking of listening, you've been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. We want to thank Jarod Marsh.
Now I'm Jay-Z.
Yeah, Jay-Z. Jarod Marsh, who recently changed his name for Mendoza. And we want to thank...
Very recent.
We want to thank our producer, Adam Rich, and we want to thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is...
play nice with others and don't fight over the microphone.
All right, till next time. Bye-bye.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at bluerockstation.com.